Let me be very clear about what happened during the classified Pentagon briefing that occurred 48 hours ago. Because what you are about to hear is not the version of events that will be discussed in congressional testimony or press conferences. What happened is that senior defense officials acknowledged to a restricted group of senators with appropriate clearances that the United States currently possesses no reliable means of intercepting Russia's Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle. Not developmental systems that might work in 5 years. Not theoretical concepts that could work with sufficient investment. No systems. Period. Having been inside the national security apparatus, having watched how admissions of strategic vulnerability are carefully staged and how language is chosen to minimize political damage, I can tell you with complete certainty that this acknowledgement represents one of the most significant shifts in the strategic balance since the Soviet Union tested its first thermonuclear weapon in 1953. Stay with me because by the end of this analysis, you will understand why this development invalidates assumptions that have guided American nuclear strategy for 60 years. The Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle entered operational service with Russian strategic rocket forces in December 2019. The system uses an existing ICBM, the UR-100UTTKH, as a booster to carry the glide vehicle to the edge of space. At that point, the glide vehicle separates and begins its descent toward the target. But unlike a traditional ballistic missile warhead, which follows a predictable parabolic trajectory, the Avangard maneuvers throughout its flight. It can alter course laterally by thousands of kilometers. It can adjust altitude. It can perform evasive maneuvers in the terminal phase. And it does all of this while traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 20. Mach 20 is 15,000 miles per hour. At that velocity, the glide vehicle crosses 250 miles every minute. The flight time from launch in central Russia to impact on Washington, D.C. is approximately 15 minutes. The flight time to New York is 14 minutes. To Los Angeles, 22 minutes. Those numbers need to sit with you before I explain what they actually mean for American strategic defense. The United States ballistic missile defense system is built around three primary components. Ground-based interceptors positioned in Alaska and California designed to intercept ICBMs during mid-course flight. Aegis destroyers equipped with SM-3 missiles providing regional defense, and THAAD batteries offering terminal phase interception. This architecture was specifically designed to defeat traditional ballistic missiles following predictable trajectories. The Avangard defeats every component of that architecture simultaneously. Ground-based interceptors rely on tracking data, predicting where a target will be based on its trajectory. They launch kill vehicles that must physically collide with incoming warheads traveling through the vacuum of space. That collision must occur during a window lasting less than 3 minutes when the target is between exo-atmospheric apogee and re-entry. The Avangard's ability to maneuver means that trajectory predictions become obsolete within seconds of being calculated. By the time an interceptor reaches the predicted intercept point, the Avangard has altered course and is hundreds of miles away. SM-3 missiles face identical problems with even shorter engagement windows. THAAD systems are designed for terminal interception, but the Avangard's terminal velocity and maneuverability exceed THAAD engagement parameters. The radar systems guiding THAAD cannot track, predict, and engage targets maneuvering at Mach 20 speeds in the lower atmosphere. The physics simply do not allow it with current technology. That is why Pentagon officials told senators we are helpless. Not because American systems are poorly designed, but because they are designed for threats that operate within physical constraints that hypersonic glide vehicles violate. But if you think this story is simply about one weapons system evading American defenses, you are missing the far deeper and far more dangerous reality. Because what Russia has demonstrated is not just a new capability. What they have demonstrated is that the entire theoretical foundation of American strategic defense is obsolete. And they demonstrated it 6 years ago when Avangard entered service. We are only learning about the Pentagon's acknowledgement now because institutional denial can only be sustained for so long before operational reality forces honesty. Most people stop here, and that is exactly why they miss what I am about to explain next. The strategic implications extend far beyond the technical question of intercepting one weapon system. They extend to the fundamental logic of nuclear deterrence that has prevented great power war for nearly 80 years. Nuclear deterrence rests on the concept of mutually assured destruction. If either side launches a nuclear first strike, the other side retains sufficient forces to execute devastating retaliation. That possibility of retaliation creates overwhelming incentive to avoid nuclear use. This logic worked during the Cold War because both sides possessed second strike capabilities that could survive initial attacks and execute retaliatory strikes. Ballistic missile defense systems threaten that logic by creating the theoretical possibility of defending against retaliatory strikes. If one side could launch a first strike and then defend against retaliation, the entire deterrence equation collapses. That is why the United States and Soviet Union negotiated the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 1972, strictly limiting defensive systems to preserve mutual vulnerability and therefore deterrent stability. The United States withdrew from that treaty in 2002 and began building comprehensive missile defense architecture. The official justification was defending against rogue states like North Korea or Iran. The unstated objective was creating asymmetric advantage over Russia and China by developing defenses that could potentially intercept their retaliatory strikes while maintaining America's first strike capability. Russia responded by developing weapons specifically designed to penetrate American defenses. The Avangard is the operational manifestation of that response. And what Pentagon officials acknowledged in that classified briefing is that Russia has succeeded. They have created a weapons system that cannot be reliably intercepted. That restores mutual vulnerability. That restores deterrent stability. And that eliminates whatever marginal strategic advantage American missile defense systems might have provided. Now, let me explain why this matters beyond abstract nuclear strategy. The existence of weapons that cannot be defended against fundamentally changes crisis dynamics and escalation calculations. During the Cold War, both sides understood that nuclear use meant mutual annihilation. That understanding created overwhelming caution during confrontations like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Leaders on both sides knew that any path leading to nuclear exchange led to civilizational suicide. The development of missile defense systems created dangerous ambiguity about that equation. If American leaders believed that defenses could intercept some percentage of Russian retaliatory strikes, that belief might make nuclear use appear less catastrophic. Not survivable, but perhaps not completely annihilating. That ambiguity is destabilizing because it creates scenarios where nuclear use might appear rational under extreme circumstances. The Avangard eliminates that ambiguity. American leaders now know with certainty that Russia possesses weapons that will penetrate any defense and deliver retaliatory strikes against American cities. That knowledge restores the Cold War understanding that nuclear use equals mutual destruction. In a perverse way, that makes the world safer by removing dangerous illusions about winnable nuclear war. But if you think that is the complete strategic picture, it is not, because Russia does not possess just one Avangard. They possess multiple regiments equipped with Avangard systems. Each regiment controls multiple launchers. Each launcher can carry one Avangard glide vehicle with yield estimated between 800 kilotons and 2 megatons. The total inventory likely exceeds 30 operational systems, with production continuing. That number needs context. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union maintained approximately 10,000 nuclear warheads. Current Russian strategic arsenal is approximately 1,600 deployed warheads under New START treaty limits. The Avangard represents roughly 2% of deployed Russian warheads, but those 30 warheads are immune to interception. That means Russia can hold 30 American targets at guaranteed risk, regardless of how much the United States invests in missile defense. Those targets would obviously include Washington, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and other major cities. But they would also include critical command and control facilities, strategic bomber bases, submarine ports, and the ground-based interceptor fields in Alaska and California. Russia can destroy the American ballistic missile defense system itself using weapons that system cannot intercept. That is not just strategic irony. That is devastating operational reality. What comes next is where things take a serious turn, because Russia is not the only nation developing hypersonic weapons. China has tested multiple hypersonic glide vehicles, including the DF-17, which entered service in 2019, and the DF-ZF, which demonstrated fractional orbital bombardment capability in 2021. North Korea has claimed successful tests of hypersonic systems. Iran is developing hypersonic missiles with assistance from Russia and North Korea. The proliferation of hypersonic weapons means that the strategic challenge facing American defenses is not limited to Russia. It extends to multiple adversaries who are each developing capabilities that exploit the same fundamental vulnerabilities in American missile defense architecture. And those adversaries are sharing technology, test data, and operational concepts with each other. The institutional response within the Pentagon has been to accelerate American hypersonic weapons development while initiating research into systems that might eventually intercept hypersonic threats. The United States has tested multiple hypersonic weapons, including the AGM-183 air-launched rapid response weapon and the long-range hypersonic weapon for ground launch. These development programs receive billions in annual funding and are frequently cited as evidence of American technological leadership. But here is the reality that does not get discussed in congressional testimony. American hypersonic weapons are offensive systems designed to strike targets. They do nothing to address the defensive challenge of intercepting incoming hypersonic threats. The research programs exploring defensive concepts are at least a decade away from producing deployable systems. And even if those systems eventually work, adversaries will adapt their hypersonic weapons to defeat them, just as Russia adapted Avangard to defeat current missile defenses. We are watching an action-reaction cycle with no clear end state except mutual vulnerability at progressively higher technological levels and progressively higher costs. That is not strategic stability. That is an arms race. Let me steal the American position here, because I never want you to simply accept my analysis uncritically. The counter-argument would emphasize that nuclear weapons remain unusable regardless of delivery system sophistication. The consequences of nuclear exchange are so catastrophic that no rational leader would initiate nuclear use even with guaranteed penetration of defenses. Therefore, the Avangard's invulnerability to interception changes nothing about fundamental deterrence logic. That argument contains important truth. Nuclear weapons are indeed unusable in any rational calculation of national interest, but it ignores two critical problems. First, crises create conditions where rational calculation becomes difficult. When leaders perceive existential threats to national survival, when decision-making is compressed into minutes rather than hours, when intelligence is ambiguous and stakes are ultimate, the possibility of miscalculation or accident increases dramatically. Systems designed to prevent accidental or unauthorized nuclear use are only as reliable as the humans operating them under extreme stress. Second, and more importantly, the existence of invulnerable offensive capabilities affects conventional conflict calculations. If Russia knows that its strategic nuclear forces cannot be neutralized by American defenses, that knowledge provides insurance against conventional escalation. Russia can engage in aggressive conventional military operations secure in the knowledge that its nuclear deterrent remains credible. That makes conventional conflict more likely, not less. We are seeing exactly this dynamic in Ukraine. Russia invaded a neighboring country, engaged in sustained conventional warfare against a nation receiving extensive Western support, and has repeatedly indicated willingness to escalate if core interests are threatened. The credibility of Russian nuclear forces, including systems like Avangard that cannot be intercepted, provides strategic cover for conventional aggression by raising the costs of Western intervention to unacceptable levels. Most people stop here, and that is exactly why they miss what I am about to explain next. Because the real strategic question is not whether hypersonic weapons can be intercepted. The real question is whether the United States can accept the return to mutual vulnerability that these weapons represent, or whether institutional momentum will drive continued pursuit of defensive solutions that cannot work. Having been inside these decision-making processes, I can tell you what I expect to happen. The Pentagon will request additional funding for hypersonic defense research. Contractors will produce optimistic assessments of theoretical solutions. Congressional committees will hold hearings, and budgets will be allocated to programs promising eventual capability to intercept hypersonic threats. But the physics problems will remain unsolved. The development timelines will stretch, and adversaries will continue advancing their offensive capabilities faster than American defenses can adapt. We will spend hundreds of billions pursuing defensive solutions to threats that may not have defensive solutions. That is not strategy. That is institutional inertia powered by political unwillingness to acknowledge limits. Let me elevate this to civilizational implications, because that is what is ultimately at stake. For 60 years, American security strategy has been built on the assumption that technological superiority provides decisive strategic advantage. The United States outspent adversaries, out-innovated them, and fielded capabilities they could not match. That technological edge translated into military dominance that shaped geopolitical outcomes across multiple domains. The Avangard represents a fundamental challenge to that assumption. Russia did not try to match American spending or replicate American defensive systems. They developed an asymmetric capability specifically designed to negate American advantages. They succeeded. And they did it at a fraction of the cost the United States spent building the defenses that Avangard renders obsolete. Other nations are learning from that success. They are concluding that matching American technological sophistication is unnecessary. What is necessary is identifying specific American vulnerabilities and developing focused capabilities that exploit those vulnerabilities. That is a completely different strategic logic than the arms race dynamics of the Cold War. China is applying this logic across multiple domains: hypersonic weapons, anti-satellite systems, cyber capabilities, each designed to negate specific American advantages rather than achieving across-the-board technological parity. Iran is applying similar logic with asymmetric naval warfare in the Persian Gulf. North Korea is applying it with nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, creating outsized deterrent effect at minimal cost. The question facing American strategy is whether to accept this new reality and adapt accordingly, or to continue pursuing technological solutions to fundamentally political and strategic challenges. That choice will define American national security for the next generation. What I know with certainty is this: the Pentagon's acknowledgement that Russia's Avangard cannot be intercepted is not an isolated technical problem. It is a strategic inflection point revealing that assumptions guiding American defense planning for decades are no longer operative. How American leaders respond to that revelation will determine whether the United States adapts successfully to changed strategic circumstances or continues down paths that consume resources without producing security. If this analysis has helped you understand strategic dimensions that official statements are designed to obscure, then share it. Discuss it with people who understand that technological capability is not the same as strategic wisdom. Subscribe if you are not already, because what happens next in this space will define the limits of American power for decades. Leave your thoughts below. Tell me, do you believe the United States should continue investing in missile defense systems or accept mutual vulnerability as permanent strategic reality? I read everything you write, and these conversations matter. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, because the admission that American defenses cannot intercept Russian hypersonic weapons is not a failure. It is the recognition of reality. And strategy begins with reality, not with aspirations that ignore it.